There's a man sitting alone in a room. No phone, no distractions, no one demanding his attention, just silence. And in that silence, something extraordinary is happening. He's becoming untouchable. Not physically untouchable, but psychologically, emotionally, spiritually untouchable. The noise of the world can't reach him. The opinions of others can't shake him. The chaos of modern life can't disturb his center. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, understood this paradox perfectly. He ruled an empire of millions, commanded vast armies, held the fate of nations in his hands. Yet every morning, before dealing with emperors and generals and senators, he would sit alone and write in his journal. Not for publication, not for posterity, just for himself. Those writings, now called meditations, reveal something that will change how you see solitude forever. The Emperor of Rome, surrounded by constant demands and endless responsibilities, found his greatest strength not in crowds or councils, but in chosen isolation. He wrote, "People seek retreats for themselves in the country, by the sea, or in the mountains. You are very much in the habit of yearning for those same things. But this is entirely the trait of a base person, when you can, at any moment, find such a retreat in yourself." Read that again. The most powerful external retreat is nothing compared to the fortress you can build inside your own mind. And that fortress, it's constructed in solitude. Right now, you're probably never alone, truly alone. Even when no one else is physically present, your phone connects you to thousands of voices. Social media feeds you endless opinions. Messages demand responses. Content streams constantly into your consciousness. You're digitally surrounded every waking moment, and it's destroying something essential in you. Marcus Aurelius never had to deal with smartphones or social media, yet he understood the fundamental problem. Constant external input prevents internal development. When you're always consuming other people's thoughts, you never develop your own. When you're always responding to external demands, you never build internal strength. When you're always connected to the crowd, you never discover who you are in solitude. Let me tell you about James, corporate executive, 42 years old, always connected, always available, always performing. Phone next to his bed, checking emails before coffee, Slack messages during dinner. His entire identity was built on being responsive, available, plugged in. Then his company sent him to a meditation retreat. No phones, no internet. 7 days of silence. James almost left after the first day. The anxiety was unbearable. Without constant input, without endless distraction, he had to face something terrifying. Himself. The thoughts he'd been drowning out with busyness. The questions he'd been avoiding with productivity. The emptiness he'd been filling with achievement. On day 3, something shifted. The anxiety didn't disappear, but underneath it, James found something he'd forgotten existed. Clarity. Not the false clarity of having opinions about everything, but the real clarity of knowing your own mind. By day 7, James had experienced what Marcus Aurelius practiced daily, the profound power of solitude to strip away everything false and reveal what's actually true. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who influenced Marcus Aurelius, taught something radical. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But here's what most people miss about that teaching. You can't control your reactions if you're constantly reacting. You need space between stimulus and response. You need silence between the world's demands and your choices. You need solitude to develop the internal strength that makes you untouchable. Think about the last time someone criticized you. What happened? If you're like most people, you immediately reacted, defended yourself, felt hurt, got angry, ruminated for hours or days. Why? Because you have no fortress, no internal retreat, no space between what they said and how you responded. The criticism went straight to your core, because there's nothing protecting your core. But the person who practices solitude, who's built that internal fortress Marcus Aurelius described, they hear the same criticism and something different happens. There's space, distance, perspective. The criticism doesn't define them because they've defined themselves in the silence. The opinion doesn't shake them because they've found stability in solitude. The attack doesn't wound them because they've become untouchable, not because they don't care, but because they care more about their internal reality than external opinions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But realizing this requires solitude. You can't discover the power of your own mind when it's constantly filled with other people's content. You can't find internal strength when you're externally dependent. You can't become untouchable when you're constantly touched by everyone else's energy." Modern society has made solitude almost impossible. Open floor plans at work, constant connectivity expectations, social pressure to always be available, cultural messaging that being alone means you're lonely, unsuccessful, or somehow broken. But Marcus Aurelius would look at modern life and see a society of people who've lost access to their greatest source of strength, themselves. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present. But you can't confine yourself to the present when you're simultaneously managing 17 different conversations, consuming endless content, and performing for an audience of thousands. The present moment requires presence, and presence requires solitude. Let me show you what happens when you remove solitude from a man's life. He becomes completely dependent on external validation for internal stability. His mood depends on other people's reactions. His self-worth depends on social feedback. His decisions depend on what others might think. He's not living his life. He's performing a role in everyone else's movie. He checks his phone constantly, not because something important is happening, but because he can't stand being alone with his own thoughts. He surrounds himself with noise, not because he enjoys it, but because silence forces him to face himself. He stays busy, not because he's passionate about his activities, but because stillness reveals the emptiness he's been running from. This man is the opposite of untouchable. He's constantly touched by everything and everyone. Every opinion affects him. Every criticism wounds him. Every change in circumstance destabilizes him. He's built his entire life on sand, external circumstances that shift constantly, instead of on rock, the internal fortress that solitude creates. Seneca, another Stoic philosopher, wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving. The process is a mutual one. People learn as they teach." But notice what he's not saying. He's not saying surround yourself with people constantly. He's not saying never be alone. He's saying be strategic about when you engage with others and when you retreat into yourself. Because improvement, real improvement, requires solitude. You need time alone to process what you've learned, space to integrate new ideas, silence to develop your own thoughts rather than just consuming everyone else's. The man who's never alone never develops. He's constantly absorbing but never processing, always consuming but never creating, forever responding but never initiating. He becomes a sophisticated echo chamber, reflecting back the thoughts and opinions of everyone around him, but generating nothing original from within. Marcus Aurelius understood this perfectly. Despite ruling an empire, despite constant demands on his attention, he protected his solitude ruthlessly. Those morning writing sessions weren't optional. They were essential. The fortress he built internally made him capable of handling the chaos externally. Think about the most challenging situations in your life, the times when everything fell apart, when relationships ended, when projects failed, when your plans collapsed. How did you handle it? If you're like most people, you probably looked outside yourself for solutions, called friends, sought advice, consumed content about how to handle it, stayed busy to avoid feeling it. And while external support has value, if that's your only resource, you're fundamentally fragile. Because what happens when the external support isn't available? What happens when you're alone with your crisis? What happens when no one can help you because the solution has to come from within? The person who practices solitude has a different resource. They can retreat into themselves and find stability there. They can sit with their crisis in silence and discover they're stronger than the crisis. They can face their darkest moments alone and emerge not broken, but refined. This is what makes them untouchable. Not that nothing bad happens to them, but that nothing external can destroy what they've built internally. Epictetus taught his students, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. But most people have this backwards. They try to control everything external, circumstances, other people, outcomes, and ignore what's actually in their power, their own mind, reactions, and internal state. Solitude reveals this distinction. When you sit alone with yourself, you quickly discover what you can control and what you can't. You realize you can't control what others think of you, but you can control whether their opinions affect your peace. You can't control external circumstances, but you can control your response to them. You can't control whether opportunities come, but you can control whether you're ready when they do. This realization, fully embodied through regular solitude, makes you untouchable, because you stop wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable and focus entirely on mastering what's actually in your power. Let me tell you about Maria, CEO of a tech company, constantly in meetings, always making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. The pressure was immense. Every choice mattered. Every mistake was visible, and Maria felt it crushing her. Then she started a practice her therapist suggested. 1 hour every morning, alone, no phone, no laptop, just sitting with her thoughts. The first weeks were torture. Her mind raced. Anxiety spiked. She wanted to quit, but she persisted. And slowly, something changed. The racing thoughts slowed. The anxiety transformed into clarity. The hour of solitude became the foundation that made everything else possible. Maria discovered what Marcus Aurelius knew 2,000 years ago. The quality of your external life is determined by the quality of your internal life, and internal quality requires solitude to develop. She started noticing changes. Criticism from board members didn't destabilize her anymore. Bad news didn't send her into panic. Difficult decisions became clearer because she developed the ability to hear her own wisdom above the noise of everyone else's opinions. Her team noticed too. She was calmer, more decisive, less reactive. Her energy had changed from frantic responsiveness to grounded presence. And it all came from 1 hour of solitude every morning. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." But you can't develop quality thoughts when you're constantly consuming other people's thinking. You need solitude to refine your own mind, to question your own assumptions, to develop your own philosophy. Think about your beliefs right now. Your opinions about politics, relationships, success, meaning. Where did they come from? If you're honest, most of them came from external sources. Things you read, people you follow, content you consumed. And there's nothing wrong with learning from others. But if you never retreat into solitude to examine these beliefs, to test them against your own experience, to refine them into your own philosophy, you're living with a borrowed mind. You're thinking other people's thoughts and calling them your own. The untouchable person has done something different. They've taken time in solitude to examine every belief, question every assumption, test every opinion against their direct experience. They've built their own philosophy, not from scratch necessarily, but from careful examination and personal integration. This means criticism doesn't shake them because they've already questioned themselves more thoroughly than any critic could. Changing trends don't confuse them because they're not following trends. They're following their own developed understanding. New information doesn't destabilize them because they have a framework, built in solitude, for integrating new data without losing their center. Seneca wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." But this suffering in imagination happens because we never examine our imaginations in solitude. We let fears run wild without ever sitting with them long enough to see they're mostly illusion. We let anxieties multiply without ever facing them directly in the silence. The practice of solitude forces this examination. When you sit alone with your fears, something remarkable happens. Most of them dissolve under direct observation. The scenarios you've been dreading reveal themselves as unlikely. The catastrophes you've been imagining show themselves as improbable. And even the legitimate challenges ahead become manageable when you face them mentally in solitude, rather than just anxiously avoiding them with distraction. Let me tell you about David, entrepreneur, building his third startup, constantly worried about failure. What if investors pulled out? What if the product didn't work? What if competitors crushed him? These fears drove him to work 80-hour weeks, not from passion, but from panic. Then his burnout forced a change. Doctor's orders: reduce stress or face serious health consequences. David started taking long walks alone. No phone, no podcasts, just walking and thinking. At first, the fears screamed louder. Without work to distract him, the anxiety was overwhelming. But he kept walking, and slowly the fears began to look different. In solitude, examining each fear directly, David realized something. Most of what he was afraid of either wasn't that likely or wasn't that catastrophic if it did happen. Investors might pull out, but he'd find others or bootstrap. Product might fail, but he'd learned from 2 previous failures and grown. Competitors might win, but that wouldn't destroy him as a person. The fears didn't disappear, but they lost their power. Because he'd faced them in solitude instead of running from them with busyness. He'd looked directly at what scared him and discovered he was bigger than his fears. That's the untouchable quality solitude creates. Marcus Aurelius faced constant threats, assassination attempts, military defeats, political betrayals, plague devastating his empire. Yet he remained stable, centered, untouchable in the midst of chaos. How? His journals reveal the answer: daily solitude to fortify his mind. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil." This isn't cynicism, it's preparation. In solitude, Marcus prepared his mind for reality. He didn't expect everyone to be wise, kind, or fair. He accepted human nature as it is, not as he wished it to be. And this acceptance, developed in quiet reflection, made him untouchable. Other people's dysfunction couldn't disturb him, because he'd already accepted it in advance. Their attacks couldn't wound him because he understood they were acting from ignorance, not malice. Their betrayals couldn't shock him because he'd prepared mentally for that possibility. Think about how you typically handle difficulty. Someone betrays you, shock, hurt, rumination. A project fails, self-doubt, despair, questioning everything. A relationship ends, identity crisis, loss of direction, emotional chaos. Why does this happen? Because you haven't prepared in solitude. You haven't examined these possibilities mentally. You haven't built the internal resilience that makes you untouchable. Epictetus taught, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." But you can't embody a philosophy you've never developed. And developing philosophy requires solitude, time to think deeply, space to examine your beliefs, silence to hear your own wisdom. The modern world offers you the opposite: constant noise, endless opinions, perpetual distraction. And most people accept this as normal, never realizing they're being prevented from developing the one thing that could make them untouchable: a deeply examined, personally developed philosophy of life. Let me tell you about Thomas, lawyer, successful by every external measure, completely unstable internally. Every case stressed him, every client demanding, every setback personal. He lived in constant anxiety, reacting to everything, centered in nothing. Then a mentor suggested something simple: 20 minutes of silence every evening. No meditation app, no guided practice, just sitting quietly, examining his day, processing his experiences, developing his understanding. Thomas resisted. 20 minutes felt impossible to spare, but he tried it. The first week was uncomfortable. His mind wouldn't stop racing. The silence felt oppressive. He kept wanting to check his phone, but he persisted. Week 2, something shifted. The racing thoughts started organizing themselves. Patterns emerged. Insights arose. By week 4, those 20 minutes had become essential. The stability he found in solitude began extending into his entire day. Difficult clients didn't disturb his peace. Challenging cases didn't threaten his identity. Setbacks didn't destroy his confidence. He'd become untouchable, not because nothing difficult happened, but because he'd built an internal fortress through daily solitude. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. But developing that way of thinking requires solitude. You need time alone to examine your thoughts, space to question your reactions, silence to hear the wisdom that's always available beneath the noise. Most people never find this wisdom because they never create the conditions for it to emerge. They fill every moment with external input. They surround themselves with constant stimulation. They run from silence like it's dangerous. And in doing so, they remain touchable, vulnerable to every opinion, affected by every circumstance, dependent on external conditions for internal stability. The untouchable person has made a different choice. They've embraced solitude as essential, not optional. They've protected their alone time as sacred, not negotiable. They've built their internal fortress through consistent practice, not occasional retreat. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you can make better." The relationship is mutual, for men learn while they teach. But notice the wisdom here. The quality of your associations matters immensely, and you can only evaluate that quality if you regularly retreat into solitude to examine the effects of your relationships. Think about the people in your life right now. After spending time with each person, do you feel more yourself or less yourself? More clear or more confused? More energized or more drained? You can only answer these questions if you have a baseline, a clear sense of who you are in solitude that you can compare against who you become in company. The person who never experiences solitude has no baseline. They don't know who they actually are because they've only experienced themselves in reaction to others. They're a social creation, shaped entirely by external forces, with no core self developed in the silence. This makes them infinitely touchable. Every interaction affects them because they have no stable center. Every relationship shapes them because they have no defined self. Every influence changes them because they've never discovered who they are underneath all the influences. Marcus Aurelius discovered his core self through solitude. And from that stable center, he could engage with the chaos of empire without being consumed by it. He could face criticism without being destroyed, experience loss without losing himself, navigate constant change without changing his essential nature. This is the promise of solitude, not isolation from the world, but engagement with the world from a place of internal stability. Not avoidance of difficulty, but capacity to handle difficulty without being destroyed by it. Not escape from life, but full participation in life from a position of strength. Let me tell you about Sarah, social worker, dealing with trauma and crisis daily. The work was meaningful but crushing. She absorbed everyone's pain, carried everyone's problems, lost herself in everyone's stories. Burnout was inevitable until she discovered something that saved her career and her sanity. Mandatory solitude. Every day after work, before going home, Sarah would sit in her car for 15 minutes. No phone, no music, no processing the day with colleagues. Just silence. Those 15 minutes created a boundary between her work self and her true self. She could acknowledge the pain she'd witnessed without absorbing it, feel compassion without losing her center, care deeply without being destroyed by caring. The solitude made her untouchable, not to the suffering around her, but to being consumed by it. She could remain present to others' pain because she'd found herself in the silence. This is the paradox of solitude. It doesn't make you less connected to others. It makes you more capable of genuine connection. Because you're connecting from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, from stability rather than neediness, from choice rather than compulsion. Marcus Aurelius understood this. His solitude didn't make him a worse emperor. It made him one of the greatest. His time alone didn't reduce his effectiveness. It multiplied it. His internal retreat didn't create external withdrawal. It enabled external engagement without internal destruction. You can have the same thing. Not by abandoning your responsibilities or avoiding your relationships, but by protecting time for solitude as non-negotiable. Morning silence before engaging with the world. Evening reflection after engaging with the world. Regular retreats to rebuild what daily life depletes. This isn't selfishness, it's sustainability. This isn't avoidance, it's preparation. This isn't weakness, it's the source of all real strength. Write in the comments, "Solitude builds my fortress." These words matter because declaring your intention publicly reinforces your commitment privately. Every comment creates accountability to yourself and inspiration for others. The collective energy of men choosing internal strength over external approval shifts the entire conversation about what real power looks like. Your voice adding to this chorus reminds you that choosing solitude isn't isolation, but initiation into something deeper. Subscribe now because this channel exists to challenge every assumption modern society has programmed into you. Each video strips away another layer of conditioning that keeps you dependent, reactive, and touchable. The journey toward becoming untouchable requires consistent input from sources aligned with internal development, rather than external validation. Your subscription ensures you don't miss the next piece of this puzzle. Hit that like button because the algorithm needs to understand that content about internal strength matters more than content about external achievement. Your engagement pushes this message to other men who are exhausted from being constantly affected by everything. Every like is a vote for depth over distraction. The numbers tell platforms that real philosophy has a place in a world drowning in superficial content. The next video goes even deeper into territory most people are afraid to explore. I'll reveal the specific practices that turn solitude from uncomfortable silence into your greatest source of power. You'll discover why the most successful people throughout history weren't the most social, but the most strategic about their alone time. And I'll show you the exact framework for building your internal fortress, brick by brick, until nothing external can shake what you've constructed internally. This isn't theory anymore, it becomes practice. Preparation stops and implementation begins. See you there where the real transformation happens.